Shachter from Extratus joining us for a little chat. Good morning, Matt, or afternoon for you.
Yeah. Hello, Emma. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. This is just a little chat about, I love the topic that we've picked and I'm excited to dive into it with you. But do you mind sharing a little bit about your background and how we met?
Yeah, absolutely. So we met through Peak Community, like a community for marketers. And, my background is I've always been a SaaS marketer from started on the PR side and worked my way all the way up to head of marketing, usually early stage companies, early stage startups. But Extratus is a little different for me. It's a professional service company helping companies with their FinOps and cloud optimization. And so I'm working with the very companies I used to be part of. And so that's lots of fun.
Got you. And tell us about your team there. So you're head of marketing at Extratus. And so tell us about, because it's brand new, right?
Yeah. I've been there almost a month at this point. Right now it's just me. So I'm in the team building phase. And so kind of coming in, building out marketing for the first time and really building the foundations for growth at the company.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we did meet a couple of months ago via Peak Community, which is a fantastic community. Shout out to Sangram and Judd and all the crew there for the top 1% of B2B marketers in the US. It's a great community. I love that space.
Yeah, it's one during the pandemic and actually early in the pandemic when I joined, it was a community that everyone was focused on helping each other. And that hasn't changed at all over the last 3 years.
It's kind of what you'd like LinkedIn groups to be, but it actually delivers, right? It's a place to go and go, hey, I'm having this struggle, or this challenge or this opportunity. Can anyone pitch in and help here? And people do. And so we got set up one-to-one to meet and greet and learn about each other. And one of the things that we shared with each other was about experience.
Yes.
And we had a really good conversation about that, which is why we're having this chat live now, about, there's so much focus on customer experience, and then it evolved and added in employee experience, especially throughout the pandemic and then the Great Resignation. Employee experience is a very ripe and rightfully so topic and focus for a different part of the business, right? It's the HR teams that are focusing on experience now. But one of the things that we talked about was what happens when you actually pull out the concept of prospect experience, right? It tends to be all lumped in together, customer experience, prospect experience, and not thought of as a separate modality.
Absolutely. I think that really started because there was a disconnect in the journey, right? That you'd have a prospect go through an experience that was largely different from a customer's experience. And so the natural thing was we want to create continuity. But I think what you're saying is that continuity can exist with the unique needs of a prospect that are different than say, a customer.
That's right. So if we look at a customer experience, first of all, it can be a lot more designed and step by step designed, where it feels like a lot more control on the experience because they're in, right? You know what stage they're at in their customer journey. You know what products they have. You know who their relationships built with. You know their internal team and have relationships there, right? So there's a lot more control around the influence you can have and the touch points that you have and the measurements that you have.
Yeah. And then when you back that up, we talk about how much is self-guided, right? Ultimately in that prospect side, you have a very self-guided experience. And so if we make the assumptions we make with customers about baseline understanding, it works both ways. If we treat a customer like they don't have a baseline understanding, we end up repeating ourselves and almost insulting where they are in their journey. Well, the same exists for a prospect. If we don't provide that information for them to be able to self-select, and if we ignore that they are uniquely different experiences, then we tend to skip over that.
It's almost, when you consider the prospect experience and journey from a design perspective, separate to the customer experience and journey, it's night and day.
Yeah,
right?
it really is.
The influence that you can have and the control that you have on the prospect journey is vastly different to the customer journey. So I find separating that out is a big sort of aha for a lot of marketers in our space, which is interesting.
Yeah, and I think, right, like so much, especially in a B2B environment where you need these different stakeholders to interact, right?
Yeah.
That what we do in the prospect side that enables them to interact with other members of their team. Like in our world, we need finance and engineering to talk to each other. It's key, not just to our sales journey, but to the successful, sort of operations of their company. Like, how can we position them as part of their prospect journey to be prepared for that reality? And so while there's a connection, it's how we, enable that action is drastically different.
Absolutely. And then if you segment it even further, there's companies that we work with that before we start the conversation, just because of the startup nature and learnings that happen along the way with executive stakeholders, is the difference between transactional journey, so product-led growth journey, transactional selling, SME to mid-market, versus consultative enterprise selling. Those two journeys and the tech stack and the team that's hired behind it is vastly different, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think you need to have an understanding of what is the action that you were looking to come out of this prospect journey, right?
Yeah.
Is it, a more consultative long-term? Is it a transaction? Is it, user adoption? You have to be really intentional about how you position your marketing to lead to that behavior.
Yeah. And what I love about this conversation, hopefully the value that we've added to the audience watching, is the fact of just the process of asking ourselves these questions and considering these different journeys, but also transactional versus consultative sales and marketing processes. That puts you way ahead of the game.
Yes.
Right? Because even just asking the question of you and your team, that's a massive step in the right direction.
And it goes to, right, like, what is the strategic approach that you will then take to your marketing based on exactly that? If I'm taking a consultative approach, how might that be different? And what tactics and what channels and what all of the things that marketers like to talk about, but like if you back that all the way up and you have to make understand that journey, it'll guide you to the right choices.
Yeah. So in your career, Matt, have you been more on the transactional side of the prospect journey or the consultative side?
Yeah, I've definitely been on the consultative side. Like, to me, I like that big messy sales cycle. I mean, it's to me, as before I was a marketer, I was a teacher. So to me, it's very similar.
Yes.
It's educate an audience to perform a behavior that they may not want to at the beginning of the stage, and so you help them kind of evolve, and that's why I like marketing. So.
Absolutely. And the other thing that, we touched base on the LinkedIn Live last week was in my belief is the number one most overlooked part of account-based marketing programs is that we call it the blue box, which is when an account's at sort of more bottom of the middle of the funnel, and it needs that sales and marketing alignment and outreach and experience at the same time. That's the easy part that I love, that consultative sales motions tend to align with.
Yeah. And I think, right, like, and I've talked about it, throughout my whole career, is this idea of, like, if you create these gaps in that alignment, right? So now you're creating gaps in that journey, which is possible. Now you have time for, like, doubt to creep in, competitors, like, let me go check something else out. Like, ultimately, you want to create, that alignment to make it easier for your buyers to buy from you.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I'm super excited to see what you do at Extratus. What's next for you with building out the team there?
Yeah. I think, right, like, so we, being a professional services, there's a big emphasis for us on content, and trying to. FinOps is a fairly early stage sort of category. And I think we're really looking to bring on a content person and kind of grow out that team in that way, so we can meet those needs of different buyers in different places.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to catching up again and learning more about how you're building out your team and your tech stack, and see how it's all going soon. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, I'll see you in Peak Community.
That sounds great. Thanks, Emma. This was fantastic.
Yeah, same. Thanks, Matt. Bye.